The Indifferent Stars Above. The Harrowing Saga of a Donner Party Bride. By Daniel James Brown. Narrated by Michael Prichard. And they had nailed the boards above her face, the peasants of that land, wondering to lay her in that solitude. And raised above her mound a cross they had made out of 2 bits of wood, and planted cypress round, and left her to the indifferent stars above. W. B. Yeats. A Dream of Death. Author's Note. Even well after the tragedy was over, Sarah Graves's little sister Nancy often burst into tears for no apparent reason. She mystified many of her schoolmates in the new American settlement at the Pueblo de San Jose. One minute she would be fine, running, laughing, and playing on the dusty school ground like any other 10 or 11-year-old. But then suddenly the next minute she would be sobbing. All of them knew that she had been part of what was then called the lamentable Donner Party, while coming overland to California in 1846. Recent emigrants themselves, most of them knew, generally, what that meant and sympathized with her for it. But for a long while none of them knew Nancy's particular individual secret. That part was just too terrible to tell. Nancy Graves's secret was just one part of many things that were too terrible to tell by the time the last survivors of the Donner Party staggered out of the Sierra Nevada mountains in the spring of 1847. And for decades thereafter many of those things were not told, except in tabloid newspaper accounts that were often compounded far more of fiction than of truth. It wasn't until a newspaper editor named Charles F. McGlashan began to delve into the story in the 1870s that many of the real details of what had happened that winter in the Sierra Nevada started to emerge. McGlashan set about interviewing survivors, and in 1879 he published his History of the Donner Party, the first serious attempt at documenting the disaster. Since then, the true stories and the fictional ones have bred and interbred in the American imagination. In introducing his recent book, Patriot Battles: How the War of Independence Was Fought, Michael Stevenson points out that our ideas about the generation that fought the American Revolution have become embalmed by the slow accretion of national mythology. How true! I still cannot think of George Washington without visualizing him as a marble bust. But if the generation of 1776 has been fossilized by mythology, the same is equally true of their grandchildren. The emigrant generation of the 1840s has been endlessly depicted in film and television productions, almost always in highly stereotyped ways. A string of clichés about strong-jawed men circling the wagons to hold off Indian attacks, and hard-edged women endlessly churning butter, and peering out from under sunbonnets with eyes as cold and hard as river-worn stones. The emigrants of the 1840s deserve better. They were, on the whole, a remarkable people living in remarkable times. Just how remarkable they were has largely been camouflaged for us, not only by the stereotyping and the mythologizing, but by the homespun ordinariness of their clothes, the commonplace nature of their language, the simple virtues they held dear, and the casual courage with which they confronted long odds and bitterly harsh realities. The men among them did, in fact, sometimes circle their wagons to defend against potential Indian attacks, though the attacks were anticipated far more often than they ever occurred. But the men also lay awake at night, agonizing about what they had gotten their families into, schemed to take advantage of one another, sobbed under the stars when their children died, lusted after women half their ages. And the women did, of course, churn a great deal of butter. But they also studied botany, counseled troubled teenagers, yearned for love, struggled with domineering husbands, and made wild, rollicking love deep in the recesses of their covered wagons. Like all people in all times, the emigrant men and women, as well as the Native American men and women, of the 1840s were complex bundles of fear and hope, greed and generosity, nobility and savagery.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?